everyone, to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future Prediction Show for 2015. I know this show's a little late, but it took a little while to put together. But I'm hoping that you'll enjoy listening to it as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Now, this show is different from the one I'll be looking at with Lynn the Psychic Focus Lady in a few weeks. That's the one where we'll actually go and look at some specific topics, and we'll also get her input for what she sees coming for the next year. But this is more in line with the show I did last year and the blog entries I did a couple of years before that, where I look at the general questions and I just try to pick out 4 or 5 themes that seem to be really strong energy currents for the year. And then I make some educated guesses, and sometimes I have actual psychic feelings and leads. I'll try to say which is which as to what the energies might produce. In general, I've noticed with card and rune readings, the energies are usually spot on. Sometimes my interpretations using my human brain are not as clear, but the actual energy focus is. Now, I decided to break the show into 2 parts, as usual, but this time it's going to be a little different. This time, for the first part of the show, I'm going to review a little bit of what was in last year's show. You can go and listen to the entire 2014 show in the archives, and it's not my intention to redo the entire show here. But just to give you some highlights, because some of the things from last year also morph into this year, but others don't seem to as much. And as I pointed out in the past too, energies don't stop just because the calendar year does usually exactly on the same dot either. So even though I'm telling the cards and runes what I'm looking for, there's still sometimes it's going to morph on for a while. Okay, with that, let's get started. And last year, I asked a variation of my usual question, in terms of what are the most likely energies or events coming up for 2014. And to sum up, these are the major points of what I've got. The big thing I named the year was the year of judgments, changes, cycles, and karma. Now, that was because the Wheel of Kitty Fortune the Wheel of Fortune in the Cat Tarot deck came up really, really, really big. And it just seemed to really be overarching this whole reading. And, lots of historians also noticed a really strong similarity between the years 1914 and 2014. It wasn't just me, but in those sort of epic things in terms of world events and geopolitical alignment, stuff was really similar. And while a new world war did not break out this past August, thank goodness, an official revival of the Cold War between the U.S. and Russia most certainly did occur. Not necessarily in August, but it did occur during this time period. An event that was made official recently by the U.S. Congress and by the Russians changing things like their official strategic defense planning. They've been sort of saber-rattling at each other. They definitely went from at the start of the year being kind of cautiously eyeing each other to really being, the rhetoric lately has been really kind of hostile. Now, the Nordic countries are also once again looking over their shoulders at Russia. The Northern Europeans, I live here in Ireland, Northern Europeans are in a kind of tense relationship with Southern Europe, so that's more stuff going on that, again, it's not identical to 1914, but you get echoes of it. And also the U.S. public is growing increasingly isolationist, somewhat understandable, I think. Even as their political leaders try, and at least seemingly fail so far, to extract the U.S. from smaller wars and entangle it in something maybe even bigger. You can see that happening. Now, I did this part of the show before the events in Paris, when this things even began to ramp up even further. That was one reason for the 3-week delay, was because just as I was about to start to do the second half of the cards, rather for the next year, that happened, and I really wanted time for the dust to settle. But even before that, in the past year, you saw these alignments coming, and again, a lot of historians noticed that there was quite a bit of not repetition, but echoing of 1914 and 2014. So I said last January, there may be great issues of peace and union going on this year, 2014, with a lot of tension in both directions, with pressures both to increase the unifications, because the union was a big theme, or other strong energies working to push unions apart. Because anytime you have both have a card like Union, you get both the positive and the negative. So you have things trying to come together, you have things falling apart. And again, amazingly, both the January and mid-year predictions had that Union card as the very first card, which shows an unusual consistency of energies and issues that have lasted for an entire year. That's really rare. And as I said before, the first card in the reading often sort of sets the theme. So while the larger themes seem to be judgments and karma and cycles, this other very strong thing of union or disunion was also very powerful last year, to the point where it set off both the first and midterm readings. Issues of forming and breaking political unions formed huge undercurrents in 2014 of many geopolitical events. Also, there were actual issues of labor and management, something to watch when this card shows up. They've been a prominent feature in terms of demand for higher wages, and that's been kind of worldwide, not just in any one country. As long as also the exposure of slave labor in a number of forms throughout the world, from Asia to the use of the American prison system and a lot of stuff in between. That's been a big theme. So I have to say this is one big hit. With constant problems inside the EU, the situation in the UK where they nearly broke up, the new union of some of the former socialist republics into an alliance with Russia, so it's sort of like reforming but in a new way. The EU was asked to join this. They probably won't. They've been asked to join the trade pact, not the actual, not the actual Soviet Union. And they've already said, since I did these notes, that they would not be joining, at least not at this time. But you have to find it interesting if they've been asked. And everything's kind of fraying at the seams in the U.S. in terms of states versus the federal government, with, in some cases, politicians actively calling for states to, if you don't like something the federal government did, just ignore it, and vice versa. So there's this huge polarization going on. Europe also saw, as I mentioned, a vote on Scottish independence, which narrowly failed to happen, but it brought out a lot of issues to the forefront. And Spain became also very close to civil unrest, or even worse, over the whole issue of Catalonia, which also would like to secede from Spain. So again, breaking of unions and becoming independent. In fact, internationally, the energy seems to be moving away from large political economic blocs in areas that already had them. At the same time, other previously unaffiliated areas seem to be forming new blocs. So of those, potentially, one of the most interesting of the series is the formation of the BRICS countries, or the continued formation of the BRICS countries along for monetary sharing, along with a possible Asian Union in Asia. I suspect these are going to be big players in the next couple of years. I don't think we've heard the last of them. Provided something like a new oil slump doesn't, cause too much infighting and people just break up because they don't want to be associated with each other. As this situation isn't over with the calendar either, as I typed this on January 6, 2015, which is when I did these notes, Ireland announced today that they may withdraw a petition to join, Iceland, not Ireland. Ireland is part of the European Union. Iceland, on the other hand, announced today that they may withdraw a petition to join the European Union. There are stories about the U.S., again, versus the federal government on a number of issues. And there were noises earlier this week, again, this was the first week of January, that from Germany that Greece might be leaving the euro. And that's still ongoing 3 weeks later. There's a lot of talk about what they call a so-called Grexit, which would be Greece leaving the euro. We'll just have to see. And, of course, the situations in Syria and Russia and the Ukraine continue as before. Those are kind of ongoing stuff we can go into a bit more later. But pretty much this was the year when union or disunion was one of the major themes in many ways. In some ways, it was stronger than one of the themes I had mentioned as I thought might be the larger one, which was the year of the strong leader. I started out calling it the year of the strong leader because that also was all over some of the other card readings. But actually, this whole thing of union and cycles seems to have really trumped that. Strong leaders were important, but not quite as much as I thought they might be. And that's a great example of my monkey mind, or my human mind, sort of getting in there and just making assumptions based on the cards, whereas the cards were just sort of laying out what they saw. Anyway, when we got to the runes last year, we had Nalzij and Tiwaj, which were judgment. And I also have, as a headline for this part, the year of the fire and elementals, especially natural disasters or influences. And the judgment runes did not break out into total war. But now they just need fire and great need. And with Tiwaj being judgment, it was a terrible year for war and conflicts, especially in some unusual places. Again, like I mentioned before, people weren't really expecting it, like the Ukraine, or suddenly the epic scale that happened in Syria and Iraq. And interestingly, Tiwaj is sort of that rune of judgment and law and the lore speaker and some of the real issues, particularly in the Middle East, particularly in the areas that are now the so-called caliphate, are, this idea of their interpretation of Islamic law and what that means, how they enforce that and killing people who don't agree with it and that kind of thing. They're not the only place that does that, but they were really, really powerful influences. So again, those runes and the desperation they caused were very important. Last January saw me speculating that the majority of current event types of news were going to come from human-caused events rather than spectacular natural disasters. And again, I think this is a hit, because there were some nasty natural disasters, extreme weather events. The weather in North America and Europe was especially weird. They did see the fires in the southern hemisphere, particularly in Australia. That the fire elemental really came out there in a physical way. But there was nothing on the scale of Fukushima or Katrina that I'm aware of. At least it didn't hit the news. There were echoes of past events like the BP oil spill or Fukushima that played in and continued its stories. But at least in the industrialized West, which is the primary focus of my readings, there weren't any this was the year of, the Japanese earthquake or the earthquake in Sumatra, that kind of thing. There wasn't one thing to point at like that, but there was an awful lot of stuff in the human realm that more than made up for it. My husband noted a serious potential for fires again with these runes. He was the one that actually pointed that out. And again, we got that at the very end of the year in Australia, and it's continuing to go on, or it was when I was writing this 3 weeks ago. I haven't checked the news. I'm really sorry for my listeners in the Southern Hemisphere, but I find I can only focus on so many places. So for something to really flag me in that part of the world, it has to be something really powerful. And of course, these fires are. But of course, fire is also about war, weapons, rockets, bombs, this kind of thing, and even space accidents, or the explosions of the test rockets that we saw. We had several accidents in the space program. They caught a lot of the public's attention, and they would fall into the same energy category. Pretty much when you look at how the year played out, fire was everywhere, both in terms of actual fires, but also in terms of here we really got it, the fire of public anger, conflicts, fighting that led to unexpected outbreaks of winter rioting in the U.S. Riots in winter? I mean, you might expect to see one, but this seems to have been kind of an ongoing theme this year, particularly going into the fall and winter season of 2014. This was sparked again, I think, by Tiwaj, laws, judgments, police officers. They all fall under this Norse rune. And again, now these great need, desperation, were felt in many places. The U.S. is one of the most obvious, but also one of the most horrific situations were in the Middle East, again under the so-called caliphate, where forcing of severe laws and judgments is taking place, even in the face of fire in the form of weapons and bombs. So everything's getting expressed here. However, the primary fires here, I think, were expressed, again, in terms of human conflict, although there were quite a number of volcanoes that went off. I do have to say that in terms of a little bit more reflection, a little bit of research, there were volcanoes that went off. Though, again, most of them were in the third world. We didn't have anything go off that was immediately in the West that caught the West's great attention. The giant Bardar and Iceland, it's Bardabunga, he's been worrying Europe, that volcano, for a while now. That's the one they're worried about possibly going off. He's been huffing and puffing and might shut down air traffic and stuff, but he's been erupting. All right, but he hasn't done the kind of catastrophic eruption that affects people outside of Iceland yet. And I say yet because we're still watching that one. I missed completely the severe cold snap coming into cards, or the runes for that matter. So that was a big miss on my part. I saw the fire, but I didn't see the ice, essentially. But weather is always tricky to read for, even when you're looking specifically at weather, which these readings were not. They were just kind of looking at general stuff, but I did miss that one. So we got fire, but we missed the ice. Now we get to the year of the strong man, or the individual in politics or leadership. The theme of the strong leader also played out, especially again in Russia, with Putin's move into Ukraine pretty much dominating the news on and off for weeks at a time. But in addition to Putin, we have also seen the amazing impact that North Korea's strongman has had on a major multinational corporation just because he didn't like a movie. He didn't have much of a sense of humor. Well, there are issues over who actually did what. This disruption was powerful and likely to result in lawsuits lasting a long time, and has also served to keep this particular strong leader, or dear leader in his case, in the news. I say that in quotes. There has also been a continued rise in polarization between different groups of people, both in North America and Europe, with some strong leaders having emerged from these movements, and some of this has been quite positive, bringing up issues that need to come out into the open, but the overall energy, unfortunately, has tended to express itself in a negative way. Overall, there seems to be a growing militancy in North America and European culture in terms of wanting solutions now and being very tired of things not resolving fast enough. Well, no one or two leaders have stepped forward to channel these hopes and fears. There's a slot being created for them. I suspect this is one energy that will not simply go away because the dates have changed. It may not be one of the major focuses of 2015, but it will not go away either. Now watch this space because this is going to come up again in the second part of the show, but with a twist. I'll just leave you with that for the moment, though, and get back to the review. When I did my 6-month look at it, when I went into I think June or July last year, there were also hints of a strong leader, but also issues of leaders letting their pride sort of get them to stumble and not accomplish everything they intended to. I think this has played out strongly in the United States this year, both in terms of the U.S. president himself, but also some of the leaders of Congress. Some of the celebrities made headlines, but it's also played out in other places as well. It's just that it gets particularly noted in the U.S. In addition to the age-old stories of pride coming before a fall, the mid-year reading also suggested again that some of the newer leaders coming to the fore were still in the starter phase of their careers. So again, I think this meme is setting to continue and needs watching, which in fact it does. But again, to continue the review. The other thing I noticed was it was a year of Great Depression that brings about political changes. And that certainly was the case both in North America and Europe, and to a large degree in the Middle East and Eastern Europe as well. I think the entire rise of this whole Caliphate, ISIS, I don't like calling them ISIS because that's a goddess name, but, the whole thing about this states in coming up almost overnight, just as the U.S. and Britain were trying to extract themselves from the Middle East, especially that area, is really one truly desperate situation. The Ukrainian, Crimean, Russian conflict was another one that sort of came out of nowhere, at least as far as the general public was concerned. Other people may have seen it coming, but most people did not. And it had a resulting in totally new treaties, and it's realigned things in the West and Eastern Europe. NATO has been affected. The U.S. seems both covertly and overtly involved. Russia has actually taken over part of the country, and it's constantly in the news. And Russia effectively has secured the Crimea and, to some degree, Eastern Ukraine, although that's still being discussed both physically and conversationally. every day. So a year that started with the U.S. and Russia at least being on partly friendly terms on the surface, planning their Olympic Games, and sort of ended with again with the new Cold War officially in place, and nuclear weapons being repositioned in a familiarly disturbing ways not seen since the early 1990s or the 1980s when I was, a younger woman. And I remember that very well. And again, this is that year of desperation that brings about political changes. It's people are getting really desperate. So they're taking that fire, which would be the nuclear weapons, and they're starting to re-aim them, which is kind of disturbing. And finally, one of the most dramatic of the political changes was the restoration of relations between the U.S. and Cuba, which was announced in December 2014 and is an ongoing process even right now. I saw yesterday, and I'm recording this the third week of January 22nd, that they're talking about embassies and things. And again, almost my entire life since I was a very small child, Cuba and the U.S. have not hardly been speaking to each other. So this is pretty cool. This is one of the good things I think that has come out of this. Was brokered by the Vatican, which has a somewhat kind of epic quality about it. Again, that sort of year of great things, great changes. It isn't as shocking to a Cold War baby by myself as the fall of the Berlin Wall, but it was certainly a big surprise. So some good news there. I suspect that this, along with many of these situations, is being brought about by serious desperation. I suspect this, along with many other of these situations, is being brought about by serious desperation. I thought last January, that this sort of desperation would cause some real changes like this. And I think in Cuba's case, it was a desperate need for resources and some economic revenue and trade. I think they were just at the end of their rope. And I think the U.S. also realized it was a good chance. So I wasn't there for all of the going back and forth, but it seemed like a really good time. But again, something that might not have happened if things hadn't been quite so stretched. I suspect the economic desperation may very well play a role in 2015 as well. And I sort of stand by that. I think it will, though again, it may or may not be the highlighted theme. Meanwhile, this review of last year's energy doesn't pretend to be exhaustive. Again, you can go back and listen to the previous show, but I think it's enough that you've got the idea of what the energies in the cards and runes were. They were, again, the energies were largely spot on. Some of my guesses were not. But I think we've got the real macro trends here. So again, the things you want to remember going into the second half of the show, which we'll get to right after this break, are last year was the year of union and disunion, the year of strong leaders, and the year of cycles and karma and changes sort of getting going. Okay, with that, let's go for the break, and we'll be right back with the actual predictions for 2015, so stay tuned. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today? We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Welcome back to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. I didn't intend for there to be 3 weeks between the writing up of a review of last year and this year's predictions, but just as I was about to lay out the cards for 2015, the situation in Paris hit the news, and it was obvious to me this could be sort of a tipping point where future event energies might morph in new directions because of it. Then also my personal life got in the way for a couple of weeks, and it just slowed things down a bit. But it feels now that in terms of energies and events, things have sorted into whatever it's going to sort into. These things are still likely to change a bit over time, but we should now be able to get an idea of the major themes for the year ahead anyway, like the ones I just went through for 2014, we should be able to get for 2015. I also will try to do nearer time check-ins throughout the year, and probably another big prediction show like in July, August again, when this current reading should set the basic stage for the rest of January through December. We'll look again to see how it's petering out or playing out in the middle of the year. Also, if something truly outstanding comes out of the blue, like, which can happen, things like, the Sumatra earthquake or something, I'll do a special reading on that if I possibly can, just to see if it's changing anything. It might be part of another show, but we'll have to see what goes on. But in any case, we have enough stuff to go on now, I think, that we can get some ideas for this year. Another note, while I was writing these notes up for this show, I kept accidentally typing 2016 for 2015. Now, I repeatedly did this several times, and I've noticed in the past that when you constantly make a mistake like that, sometimes it just means that your typing's off, but sometimes it actually means something, particularly for a psych act. So I'm going to suggest some of what I'm about to go into applies not just to this year, but also into 2016. It doesn't mean that, it's all going to go on into 2016, but the trends are likely to flow over in some way because they just kept coming up so often. Okay, so the way I asked the question for this year was, what are the main energy trends or events in the cards and runes are bringing it to our attention for the calendar year 2015 and possibly a bit beyond, with an emphasis on current world events? And I put that possibly a bit beyond in again because I just kept getting that sense that, it was going to spill over. Okay, so we got our side cards here, and while it doesn't show up as clearly just looking at the side cards alone, I wanted to point out from the start that a major, if not the major theme from this year's reading is partnerships, families, and wealth. This is going to become more obvious as I break the whole reading down into smaller parts, but this was so clear I just wanted to frame that at the onset. Now that I pointed that out, let's break down first the side cards for their energies and get a feel for why I might be saying this. The very first card in this reading is friendship. Now, friendship is an amazingly positive reading to start out, this card to start out this sort of reading. Especially as the first card so often sets the tone and direction for the entire reading. The last card or rune also tends to help frame it, but we'll talk more about that a bit later. But in general, the friendship card is about exactly what it looks like. Several friends sitting happily together having a drink at a pub, while a fourth hand can be seen holding a pint, that's, holding a glass of beer in their hand. And the viewer isn't sure if this new person is going to sit down at the table as a friend, if they're going to walk on by, or just what they're doing. We can't tell. We also don't know, just from looking at the card, how the hidden potential friend or person entering the picture may affect the already ongoing conversation the three friends are already having. Now, in current events or a world reading, I think this card is all about the continuing jockeying about and reforming of old and new alliances that has been mentioned several times already during the readings over the past year or so. And again, that union-disunion theme. But now it's the paramount energy out there. As always, this will affect everyone to a degree, and many good things are likely to come out of this as people sort out who their true friends really are. On the other hand, expect the birth and creation of new partnerships, treaties, alliances, and the breakups of others, just like was starting to happen last year. Every card holds positive and negative aspects, and the friendship card is no different. My focus keeps shifting to that fourth or hidden friend in this case, and it worries me a bit. I think it's a message to not only pay attention to the obvious partnerships, both personal ones and international. But watch for surprises or hidden things behind the scenes. Instead of our old friend, the Union card that we had last time, we have the Birth card. Birth is next, and it's obviously meaning the start of new things, ideas, enterprises, nations, alliances, technology, etc., suggesting this is going to be a year of innovation and a time when new things will be celebrated. This actually fits pretty well with a number of the other trend forecasts and predictive forecasts I've listened to from other people over the last several weeks, but it came up independently here as well. It's nice to have some further confirmation in my own cards, but I have to say that I'm not the only one that's noticed this. And realize that during a time when it's a celebration of the new, it doesn't mean the old goes away, but it means the bright and shiny and what seems to be new and all original tends to get more attention than the old or the traditional way of doing something or seeing something or having something. Also, putting the first two cards together now, we have friendship, birth, or the start of new friendships. Again, the start of new friendships, alliances, treaties, etc., as I already said. In addition, 2015 being a time when I think friendship will be taken to an entirely new level by a lot of people personally, especially people that up until now may have been somewhat loners or not that invested in people outside their immediate blood family. I think we're also going to see a continuation of, again, that union-disunion thread from 2014. Only by now, some of those unions or disunions have already or about to occur, and they'll really start cementing and morphing into their newer forms. We've been seeing an awful lot of just kind of come here, go away, go away, go away in the last year, but now we're going to see actual both contracts and uncontracting taking place, disillusionment. Interestingly enough, while I totally believe that human choices and decisions have a lot to do with these changes, both positive and negative, it does appear that a certain amount of what is currently happening now is fated to occur. It's either totally out of human hands to start out with, or previous human choices made before now simply mandate or create the fate that is about to occur. When we are talking about human-caused events, I often think the second is more likely, but the effect on the world or even the reader is pretty much the same. That's because once these things start rolling, they just cannot be stopped. So whether they were started sort of cosmically by some outside force or from choices people made, on the ground, it doesn't matter that much. Why do I say this? Because the next card is the wheel. And the wheel in the deck, this one is simply called the wheel. But in many tarot decks and other types of oracular decks, it's called the wheel of fate or the wheel of fortune. Occasionally, it's also called the wheel of karma, cause and effect, which is partly how I see it manifesting here. Now, why does this sound familiar? That's because what was the major theme from last year? You got it. It is also, this card is directly in the middle of the 5 cards, suggesting that right now, this year is a very fateful time, when many things come together, and when that wheel will just now be turning in the direction it's been spun. And it isn't going to stop in some ways until the events put into play are ready to stop. Which doesn't mean that humans don't get to try to find solutions to their problems, because we don't know which issue can be turned around and which one can't. You know, it's from our perspective, we just need to realize that there are some things that are out of our control. Sort of as a general message to anyone ready to hear it, if you're feeling like events are simply washing you down the river and you can't get up for air, the best idea is to either to try to just flow with them, hang on to your boat, or if you can not get into the water in the first place, just sort of hang out on the shore and stay away from it. Because once some things are born and set in motion, they're just not going to stop until they play themselves out this year. That's just how it's going to be. This is true both in friendships, and that's in a good way and a bad way, but some of the good ways, and the sort of birth of the new thing that's coming out, again, for both good and bad. Lots of really cool things can happen during new and celebratory times, but we just have to be careful that we don't get carried away and sort of just, think just because it's new, it's great, because it may or may not be. In any case, we're likely to be in for a really wild ride, especially, I think, later in the year. I think the trend's going to start now. We're going to start seeing it popping up real soon here, but I think it's going to really snowball later. After the new birth and great changes, the next card we have is Liberation. Now, this is the card of jailbreaks, revolutions, escape from danger, escape from old habits, in other words, new things, freedom, and choice. The couple on the card are fleeing a prison on horseback, and they have to take the narrow bridge off the usual road, and they choose to go off into the unknown rather than the road that's obviously more traveled, but where people might be more likely to find them. This card fits perfectly with the birth card because both are, again, starting something, possibilities of next steps. But whereas the birth card has a potential to be either fierce or gentle, like human births, they vary. Sometimes, even the same mother will have very different experiences with different babies. The Liberation card is almost always breath-catching, sudden and exciting, at least at first. It can also be disruptive, upsetting, and confusing. It's got a lot of positives, but it's got a lot of craziness that goes on with this card, too. To be suddenly free of something, let loose and on your own, or perhaps on your own with a friend or partner, is scary enough, and something I think a lot of people are going to be feeling this year. Hence, I think, again, that need for reaching out for strong friendships, both personal and international scale. I think this card, along with others, also suggests a high probability of international revolutions, not all of them violent, but some of them probably will be. People making attempts towards freedom, as well as attacks on freedom, for real. And although in propaganda, again, when you get these themes, you get things played up. So both real revolution, real attempts for freedom, and basically its counterfeit will both be there. I think some of this will manifest in the cyber world, as well as the more physical and human one. I think that there are going to likely to be a lot of great issues of freedom and liberation versus wealth, and possibly, versus corporation. Again, we'll talk about that more in a moment because we've got more on that. But just again, this we're already seeing these trends. They're going to continue and magnify. Finally, to some of the side cards, it's highly likely that there's going to be a powerful woman involved in world events in 2015, and I push especially towards 2016 in this card. Now, why do I say that? Because this card is the beauty. And this is the card of a lovely young woman seeing herself in a stained glass window for the first time. And she realizes she's beautiful, and she also realizes the promise of her feminine power. Like all cards, it has both light and dark aspects. On the good side, this card is all about self-esteem for both sexes. And for women, this is often a card of pulling yourself together and taking charge of your own life. I can do this. I sense this will be one way in which the card acts on individuals, and in a minor way, it's likely to be seen in places like the entertainment world, where I think the birth card will combine with the beauty card and the new card to have lots of bright young things coming forward to try to entrance and distract us from reality for a while. I also think this kind of bright young things theme will be occurring in business, politics, and perhaps even religion. I am not sure how that last one plays out, but look for new religious leaders and or even new religions to start making an impact on the world scene, especially for women or for, again, the bright young things. I keep feeling this bright young things or the very young people playing some sort of very strong role here. But of course, women in general are needed in order to give birth. You don't have birth without females, at least not yet. I know they're working on it, but so far that's what we have. And there may be issues actually around actual physical birthing or children And I think human genetics may start coming even sharper focus, at least in the media this year. It's already been pretty big, but I think it's going to be also part of this feminine power, and again, go with the birth card. However, I think the major way the beauty card is likely to play out in this year's international reading, it's going to be the role of one or more likely several strong women who are going to make pivotal decisions or wield their feminine power in such a way that they seriously impact world events. Now, that's the meme, and I honestly, I'm going to stand by that. I think that's going to be a very strong energy. Some of my guesses that my human mind is being drawn to, and also I think there's a little bit of psychic push too. I mean, I feel this kind of push there is first to Christine Lagarde, who is the current head of the IMF. I think she needs watching. Angela Merkel in Germany, of course, is obviously always comes up in these sorts of things, and particularly because some of the things that are come out in the other cards and runes in a moment. And then for some reason, I keep focusing on the Queen of England. Possibly some other female royals as well, both European and elsewhere, but I don't know why. The message is watch the Queen of England. I don't know why, but pay attention to that. There's by no means the only women I think that are involved here, and as I think the case of the fourth friend on the friendship card, this is the year to expect people and events to pop up in rather unlikely and unexpected ways. Well, now that pretty much sums up our sign cards, which on their own would simply suggest a year where people, revolutions, and new ideas would be the main topics, with strong women and human friendships interacting with that. And I think those are all really strong things. I think, just knowing that, we would have a pretty clear view of some of the year's trends. But I wanted to delve a little bit deeper. So we went on and looked at our two cards from the Cat's Eye Tarot, which is the wonderful deck done by a veterinarian who is also an artist, who has a small animal cat clinic in the United States. And she's generously given me permission to use these cards on my show and on my blog. And I just think they're absolutely wonderful, because they explain things express them in such a totally different way. The interesting thing is what we got with the Cat's Eye Tarot are both Pentacle cards. Now, with Pentacles, the one thing you can say about that particular group in the tarot is they're almost always about wealth, money, and things relate to that. In some decks, they are even called the coins. And this, they're just, it's about money and material things. Now, this, along with the final rune we'll get into later, are why I think a lot of the background music in 2015 and going into 2016 is going to be hearing all about the wealth, money, families, social safety nets, education, and jobs. But let me break that down. How do I get this out of these two cards? Well, the Three of Pentacles, called coins, again, as I mentioned in some decks, shows a colony of barn cats. They're all gathered together to share kitten-raising chores. We have what appear to be a nuclear family, or perhaps a mother cat and her sister, which either way in cats is a nuclear family. Sometimes the Tom takes part, sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes it's the another female, but they're taking care of each other. They're washing each other. Well, the mother cat nurses a litter of very tiny kittens. In the foreground, an older kitten is bringing a mouse back towards the family, possibly to share, or just toys for what are probably his little brothers and sisters. In a reading, this card is about completing tasks, having job security, working in ways that suits a client's best talents, or even managing time properly. It's also about the importance of family and indeed friendships. We don't know for certain if the young cat on the card is related physically to the little family in the background or not, but he's obviously friendly and helping out. It's easy to see how these energies morph in a current events or international scale, a combination of concerns about families, children, job security, food security, a secure place to live, how all these things can be read from that. I think these trends are going to manifest on a personal scale of more and more people focusing themselves inward as these issues make more of an impact. It's not that they won't be focused on an international or national scale at all, but I think that they're just not going to be as focused on how governments, corporations, banks, NGOs, and even military missions or pipelines are doing unless it affects them directly. And then they're going to be paying really, really strong attention. That liberation card is just going to come out and go, voop. This card is also about teamwork, planning, confidence, or the lack of confidence. So while on the one hand, you're likely to see families and friends pushing and pulling together to ensure that they have things they need, there's also likely to be a lot of teamwork, planning, and confidence on the part of elites, or at least some of them, who think they know the best way to push the world forward. Again, I feel a strong connection here to that beauty card and the female leaders. Some really great things could be done during this time period, especially, I think, in the realms of science and technology. But I get a worrying feeling about some of the partnerships or teams that come together may not end up making a lot of people or even nations highly happy here. I think there's going to be some real winners and some real losers, and they're not always going to be obvious at first which is which. Okay, the second card we have in the Kitty Tarot, Cat's Eye, is the Eight of Pentacles, which is diligence, knowledge, and detail. And so it fits right in with the previous card. This card shows two older cats, again parents or perhaps some other cat and her sister, bringing mice to the young kittens to show them how to hunt. The babies are practicing leaping and pouncing, skills they'll need to survive in the world of barn cats. Although barn cats will generally enjoy hunting, even when there's a full food bowl for the farmer for the rest of the day, this is the skills that they would need as adults. So they're learning their future work. So this card's had aspects of education, practice, study, preparation, and teamwork as the kittens work together to get their mouse. The card also is about mundane work and jobs and brings up questions if you're reading for like a single client about them doing a job that just pays the rent. Is that what they're doing? Or do they need to be working at something they find more meaningful? I get a lot of people that come in for readings and they're just kind of generally distressed, and we have to try to figure out why. And a common theme is, yes, they're very happy to have a job, but, and it's that but, that we have to look at. And sometimes the solution may be just to go ahead and stay with it and find other things that one can do to express oneself, other work. And other times the correct thing may be to go back to school or to retrain or try to find a different career, because that's what the person is feeling moved or pushed to do. And it can also be, again, like training for a new career or becoming a manager of some sort, just any of those things, but it's usually a push card. So when you move that into an international reading, this is more about the passing down of skills from the old to the new. In the previous card, the mother cat feeds her very tiny kittens because they're just too young for regular food. Will another cat or teenager care for her and protect her babies because it's hard to do both? If you see parallels to this in the social safety net here, or what Europeans sometimes call the welfare state, that's intentional. I don't want to get too political here, but it doesn't matter if you see the safety net as the nuclear family of queen, tomcat, and kittens with nephew, or if you see the safety net as housing for all and keeping single-payer healthcare going in your country. These issues of family security are going to be paramount this year. They're just going to be on everybody's mind, I think. The second card just continues this theme, this time leading more on the education of the young, training, and the passing on of real skills level, as well as people finding on a personal international level the work either paid or volunteer, physical or spiritual, that gives them hope and meaning. I get a lot of sense of despair from these cards as well, because while it may be wonderful for people and even nations that are able to accomplish these things and provide this security, it may be even more disappointing and stressful for people and nations who find their security and education unobtainable or falling apart when it was previously at least sort of holding together. One thing to note, I'm feeling a strong push on the second card towards the U.S. student loan crisis and its obvious impact on people's lives there, as well as the impact on the future education of the young, passing on skills, and even getting work done. Although, also if you live in some of these places that have been better off, like say in Greece, this wouldn't have happened this year, but people in Greece over the last several years have seen what happens when you have what is more or less a first world country that just kind of comes apart at the seams. And the same thing is happening in some parts, particularly in the city, urban areas in the Middle East, where things have just exploded, or the Ukraine, where people's lives, you've gone from maybe worrying about the state of the world to worrying about how you're going to get dinner for your family. And that I see a lot of that trend continuing. And then on a national scale, countries trying to figure out how they provide dinner for their people. It's sort of a roller coaster effect. I'm not sure this problem is going to be solved this year either, but it feels like this year that the issues are finally taken really seriously, again, by both international countries and corporate entities who actually fund a lot of the world. And they're going to be putting pressure on, in the U.S. in terms of the student loan program. I think it's going to be corporations to put pressure there on Congress. That's my monkey mind. That's making an educated guess. But it feels like they want them to do something about it. I think this theme is going to carry into 2016 too, with the elections in the U.S., but the wheels will start turning there. I'm a little more fuzzy on how this is going to play out exactly in other countries, but where there are similar problems, like with the NHS in Britain, or even, let's say, more profound issues like in the daily life in the Ukraine, I don't think it's going to get all sorted at this point. Some of this never gets sorted, but it's particularly a strong themes where it really upsets people. I think it's going to keep going this year. There is also likely to be strong moves all over the world on families, and again, those corporations, fighting for ways to pass the wealth down to their children and keep it in the family. And you're going to see this, ideas of inheritance and such, impact both on, again, on that personal and on an international scale. Look for a lot of tension between the personal desire to keep wealth in families, or in the hands of larger corporations, and those wishing to use it towards some sort of security and family for everyone. Again, I don't want to make a political statement, but this will be a strong theme this year, and I've got it in red: personal corporate wealth versus social safety net funding. It's just there's no right or wrong answer, but they're just both. That's a strong theme. I sense the military and other governmental spending will also be issues in many places, but governments who manage to find practical ways of actually addressing some of the social issues will do better this year than those that totally ignore the topic or only give it lip service. And I think that's on all levels. Again, I think municipal and cities will do better if they're able to deal with some of these problems, as will, states or, provinces and countries and regions. I think it's, it's like there is no one right answer, but just ignoring it or pretending that it's all okay is just not gonna fly. The fascination with the new this year is also likely to result in some sweeping proposals, both on a national and international and local level in this regard, all three levels. Some will be surprising, and they may actually work. But don't forget the fourth hand that's in there, and ask who's really behind something new. Again, don't, just because it looks good and shiny doesn't mean it is. Really look at it. But that's not to say don't try, because that's part of this. Is I think this, one of the things the new theme is going to do is give people feeling like they have the permission almost to experiment, to try new things. I get not quite the same feeling as the late 1960s, but there's some of that starting to float in the air, that liberation feeling, which can be used for very powerfully to move positively forward on some of these issues, or can just go off kind of into, personal la-la land, and we want to direct things in a way that's helpful. That pretty well sums up all the cards I've got from both decks, along with some other impressions that I've mentioned. But we haven't tied into runes yet. And in my experience, the Germanic runes are somewhat more archetypal, or in a sense epic, than the cards. They focus on very old, very ancient concepts that are pretty basic, and gives us the undercurrents often of the reading. They think of them kind of like the foundation. We're doing them last, but they're sort of like the thing that sort of ties it all together. The runes I got for this reading are Manaj and Fehu. And they drive a screw right down into the depths of all the other stuff and bring the main energies and tension for the year together, which are, again, human partnerships and wealth. That's Manaj and that's Fehu. Does it sound familiar? It should. It's been all over the rest of the reading. A reading which in effect starts with the concept of friendship or partnerships and ends with the dual concept of friendships and wealth or money. Manaj is actually two joy runes that come together, the rune for joy. They come together and they face each other like a double M. And the rune poem actually says that man is the joy of man, or, a human is the joy of another human in the Old Norse. In that sense, this rune is the same as the friendship card, at least on this one level. We are talking about partnerships between human beings, usually, or at least human-created institutions like corporations, countries, etc. However, inside of this rune, it's also hidden two clan banners representing family, which was a form of wealth to the Norse. Your ancestors and your descendants and all of your kin are very important. But the clan banner is also a battle flag. So we have battle flags facing each other. So if you're thinking Hatfields and McCoys, you kind of got it. Now, anyone who's ever been to a big family reunion knows that most, if not all, of the feelings are often expressed at the same time. These days, most family feuds do not end in real bloodshed and exile, or the exile simply exists of Aunt Busybody and Uncle Obnoxious not being invited back to Christmas dinner next year, but the underlying seeds of all those emotions are still there. We have love and we have hate. We have esteem and we have vanity. We have respect and we have pride, etc. We have all these dualities, particularly within the clan and the family. So you have lots of deep stuff there, and that's a lot of deep stuff in this rune. Okay, so when again the Fehu rune, which has come up in many current events readings in the past, is all about wealth. The rune itself literally means cattle, which was a main form of wealth for the ancient Germanic people. But it's also about gold, money, and fertility. Fertility of people as well as fertility of crops. And it's in this crossover into sexuality and fertility that gave me hints of the birth card might be partly actually about issues of birthing or even genetics coming up this year, as well as farming. Agriculture and food production would be another form of wealth as well and involved in this. I think there is a potential for some great advances here in those areas, but there may also be some threats bubbling up the surface. Monkey Mind Japan keeps coming here, and I just feel a pull towards it. I get kind of a psychic pull in a number of ways. To just watch closely on all these issues. And in the U.S., I would watch on the agriculture, U.S. and Europe. The food issues seem really big there. Gold, of course, is going to be an issue this year. It always is. But I'm getting the battle flag sense when I focus on it. So sort of battles over gold. You see, I've mentioned this before, but for new listeners, I'll say this again. My husband, the rune master, has said many times that the rune Fehu is basically about fights over sex and money. And that the Germanic opera cycle, Rheingold, that everybody's familiar with, that Wagner wrote, is really 18 hours of exploring the rune Fehu. That is, 18 hours of fights and family feuding over sex and gold, which is pretty much the case. That's pretty much what the opera is. And, of course, sexuality and fertility are a lot more complex concepts, especially in the runes, than just two potential parents having a lovely private evening in front of a roaring fire. Because sexuality flows over into life force and what gives human beings their drive to create, and fertility is also about results of that creativity. So you have, a lot more than just the obvious, tremendous depth here of things that could be affected. So to some degree this year, I think we will see the progress I already mentioned in terms of technology, new ideas, and new concepts that may liberate us from some of our old patterns of doing things, which are likely to be intensely positive, some of them, and it may even result in wealth generation for some individuals or groups. And again, wealth is more than gold, wealth is more than cattle, wealth is everything fortune that comes into that concept. I actually have a feeling a new art form is likely to be coming about. I have no idea what that is, but it feels very strong. Perhaps it's a new trend that gets an actual name that shows up, and it could be in music, or it could be in craft, or it could be a movement or something. But it's just figuring in the background there, and it's really niggling at me. So, it would be something as obviously different as, say, rap is to rock, or, something like, the arts and crafts movement, but that would, when it was new, or, I think you're going to hear the term Renaissance a lot, but there's going to be something happening that's going to get a new name. I'm just not sure where it is, but watch the arts and entertainment for that. That would be kind of a fun thing we can check back in on at the end of the year and see if that actually happened, if we can point that out. But overall, I think these two runes, getting back to them, of human partnerships, alliances, unions, and groupings, along with Fehu, wealth and sexuality, creativity, and gold, they're going to work sometimes together to try and keep the wealth for those that have it, but also is, again, that pressure valve in other places for some of the wealth to be, for other people to get it. In other words, people that have it want to keep it, people that don't have it want to share. And I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. It's just that, if you're hungry and someone else has a feast, you may feel hungry and wish to have food. And yet, if you are worried that you won't have enough food, you want to keep what you have. And I think this is going to play out on just really all levels. I don't really mean to keep repeating myself, but that's really what the cards seem to be saying. But there's also this huge potential for violence in these last two runes that I don't want to underestimate here at all. And if such violence or even full-blown wars take place, you can be assured that some of the bottom line on this is great wealth and fortunes that are at stake here, as well as some family feuding, both among individuals and nations. I mean more than, obviously war is a feud, but there's some refusal to really interact with each other. It's kind of a childish feeling almost. I look seriously at nations where families are still in control of wealth in an obvious way, like Saudi Arabia, or even parts of the U.S. where old families are, and new entrepreneurs sort of hold huge slices of the wealth on offer. But I'm getting, again, this family feud on a world scale level that is just very, very personal in a lot of ways. And that's what makes it that's what makes it a little bit different. This all combines with a tendency on the part of the public worldwide to want to focus on that combination of immediate needs of family and job that I mentioned, and the exciting aura that all new things will seem to have. They'll be new, shiny, freeing, liberating, and friendly, and they could lead to some really serious social upheavals in many places, and perhaps some actual social solutions in others, as I mentioned before. But again, I think there's going to be a big response on the part of the powers that be when they catch on to this new and shiny trend to provide as many new and shiny things as possible to keep people distracted, especially from the serious things they don't really want them to see. However, except for the serious battle over wealth and possible battles over sex and sexuality and those kind of related issues, and that one's not minor either. There are a lot of places where sex and sexuality are also becoming matters of conflict, but that's, and again, the Middle East would be one area. So would be some states in the U.S. and there are various referendums in various countries. So that's something that's not unimportant. But I don't see nearly the violence in this potential energy reading that I was expecting, which is the good news. I thought there would be more violent tendency given the last year's reading, and it doesn't seem as bad as I was afraid it might be. The potential is there, but that doesn't mean it's going to definitely play out. And the fourth hand of the friendship card really calls to me on this one. It says that if serious wars do break out, or even extreme local violence, look towards an unexpected or perhaps unseen source for the actual instigator or instigators. Not every single case of violence, of course, will have this sort of problem, but largely this is going to be a meme, I think, and it will be a great year for fans of conspiracy theories. And remember, it isn't being paranoid if they really are out to get you. In other words, pay careful attention. Not every weird and far-off theory is going to be correct, but some of them may be, especially this year. This is the year of the hidden friend. I think there is also the potential to get through this year with a minimum of international violence if people make the right choices now and don't allow themselves to be manipulated by that barely seen hand on the friendship card. I'm not counting on this because the potential for problems with a year dominated by wealth and human relationships is just too likely to have a match lit here and there and for the fire to come out. But if we're very lucky, we may get through 2015 at least without a World War III level or violence on that scale. I think we'll know better about this trend a few months down the road, so it's definitely one I want to look into at the mid-year. It's entirely possible that I've missed something, that in some other way, wealth and partnerships, especially concerning jobs and people supporting their families, all come together to create a different sort of issue. Some major economic stuff is possible. And in fact, even likely, I think, with these cards, again, look for extended families and corporations, banks, etc. Do their best to keep all the Feihu in the family. Basically, you can think of keep the Feihu in the family is going to be a big theme. And that includes your personal private family that you need to try to keep the Feihu in, and the big corporate so-called family that wants to keep it in theirs and their shareholders. Finally, the other thing we didn't see much of here was the potential for non-human disasters to be prominent in the headlines this year, which doesn't mean they won't happen. I mean, we had some happen last year too. In fact, I'd probably take a second look at these on another show because it's so little of it. But what it really means is that at this point anyway, for many people, the social, economic, and political issues are more likely to be the ones that really drive their lives for the most part. I suspect the non-human events that cause problems may revolve somewhat around this. You know, for example, if people can't afford to heat their homes and there's a severe winter storm and they freeze to death, that's a combination of people and weather. If an earthquake hits an area where the central government has ceased to function and aid is just too dangerous to bring in, that will be that's a natural event that has human problems that make it worse. And I felt a strong pull of the Middle East on that particular one, although it could happen anywhere that the system has sort of just fallen apart. And anybody that's trapped in an earthquake or a flood or a major disaster in one of those areas is pretty much just going to be on their own. But I think, to sum up for this show, we basically have the themes of, and I put these, in a list here so they're very easy. Human partnerships and wealth, economic inequality and or the current wealth structure versus the social safety net. So think of it, wealth versus social safety, if that makes it easier. A celebration of all things new and shiny. The year of the strong woman leader or leaders. Last year was the year of the strong man. This is the year of the strong woman or women. A personal tendency of people to focus on friends, family, and job security rather than the outside world. And a potential for revolutions, disagreements, or even battles over wealth, but often caused by unusual or hidden manipulation. In other words, last year's fate, changes, and cycles of karma has now morphed into the year of karma, fate, changes taking place. That wheel is now turned, and we all need just to be ready and hang on to the sides of our boat when we have to, because the water is likely to be really moving fast and rather choppy. From the cards, I would say our true friends and families are the boat we cling to. On that note, I'm going to close for now. This has been a really long show, but it's been really fun to put together. And I always, should there be more specific predictions in my upcoming shows with Psychic Focus Lady in a few weeks, we'll probably go over some of this stuff then as well. And I'm really looking forward to see what she has to say, because she's got like a little different perspective. And if you have a particular current event or situation you'd like either of us to look at, you can email me at Melodi with an I, that's MELODI, reader@gmail.com, and we'll consider it. We can't promise to look at everything, but we'd really like to get some feedback on what you'd like to know about. It makes the show a lot more interesting. And, and that'll just, and we can pick up on things, particularly stuff that either hasn't been talked about here or things that may have been unclear for here. And again, I will take another look at this. I'll probably keep up a little bit of reading some every other month or so, smaller readings, and then the big one in the middle of summer to see where we're going and where we might be heading from there. I want everyone to take care. You may want to listen to this more than once. I'm going to try to have the cards and things up as soon as possible on my website, which I'm working on getting re-up and redesigned. And so that should be fun. So it may take a little while, but they will get there. But meanwhile, I want everybody to take care and, look to your friends and family. That's your boat. Hang on to your boat and get ready for the ride. Until next time, then, I'll say goodnight here at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.